My husband didn't know I could speak Spanish. When I accidentally heard what he and my own daughter talked about me, I made my mind. I heard them before I even stepped into the hallway. Chris's voice came first, low and annoyed, followed by Marissa's sharper one. They were speaking Spanish again, the language they thought wrapped them in secrecy. They had no idea I understood every single word. They never wondered why I stayed so quiet, why my face never reacted, why I simply kept walking as though their voices were muffled by age instead of comprehension. That morning, though, their tone cut sharper than usual, and I stopped just before turning the corner. I stood still, barely breathing, listening. She is a burden, useless. Marissa's voice carried the same irritated snap she used when the dog tracked mud inside. In my mind, the English translation arrived instantly, like a reflex I had spent decades hiding. A burden, useless. She was talking about me as if I were a piece of outdated furniture someone needed to drag to the curb. Chris responded with a tired sigh, his words flowing in Spanish that he thought protected him. Old woman should be in a home already. I felt the words before I finished translating them. Old woman should be in a home already. I pressed my fingers together to keep them from trembling. I was standing only 6 steps behind them, listening to my own obituary delivered by the 2 people who were supposed to care for me. Marissa gave a short, ugly laugh. She is embarrassing. Embarrassing. At 76 years old, you would think insults would sting less. But no matter how long you live, cruelty always finds a fresh place to land. I swallowed hard and forced myself not to make a sound. They had no idea their secret language was not secret at all. I stayed hidden, heart thudding, and listened to them move into the kitchen. They began preparing coffee for themselves, without offering me any, even though the pot sat right in front of them. That tiny gesture summed up everything. I was an afterthought at best, and a nuisance at worst. A few minutes later, guests arrived, and the charade began. Marissa switched to English so she could perform her false kindness. She is just staying here temporarily, she said loudly, as if rehearsed. We take good care of her. Inside my mind, the words twisted. They talk like I am dead weight. They talk like I should be grateful they let me breathe their air. The guests gave polite nods, unaware of the contempt hiding beneath her sweet tone. I stepped farther into the room, hoping to at least blend into the background, when Marissa turned to me abruptly. Do not hover, she said through a tight smile. You make the house feel crowded. Her eyes flicked toward the guests, warning me not to react. I felt a sharp pressure building in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. I had learned long ago not to show pain in front of people who enjoyed causing it. About 200 words into that morning's humiliation, something inside me whispered that I needed to say something not to them, but to whoever might listen later, to whoever might understand what injustice feels like when it unfolds inside your own home. So let me say this now, while the memory is still raw. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. I tried to leave the kitchen unnoticed, but then I heard Marissa's voice again, lower this time, sliding back into Spanish because she assumed I could not follow. What she said next froze me in place. Logan died without knowing the truth about me. I felt the ground shift. Logan, my first husband, the man I had loved through poverty, sickness, and long days of worry, the man who died suddenly from a stroke. What truth? What could possibly be left unsaid after all these years? Chris answered her quietly, also in Spanish, as if the walls themselves were ears. And Natalie never will. My mind translated before my heart could catch up. Logan died without knowing the truth about me, and Natalie never will. The words rolled through my chest like cold water. I gripped the countertop to steady myself. They were talking about Logan behind my back. They were hiding something that belonged to my past, my grief, my marriage, and they said it with the confidence of people who believed I was too ignorant to understand. Marissa exhaled sharply, annoyed. She is old. She cannot even tell when we are talking right in front of her. Another translation cut through me like a blade. She is old. She cannot understand anything. I wanted to shout that I understood everything, that their words felt like salt rubbed into old wounds. But I stood there, invisible in my own home. When they walked out of the room, laughing lightly, I remained by the sink, holding on to the cold edge as if it were the only thing keeping me upright. My breath felt shallow, but my mind was awake in a way it had not been in years. Their voices replayed over and over, each sentence carving a new line into my resolve. They think I do not understand, I whispered to myself. They forget who I was before I became their convenience. Before I was Logan's wife, before I was the old woman they shoved into silence, I spent a full year living beside people who spoke only Spanish. A year where a different family treated me with more kindness than my own household showed me now. A year that taught me how to listen even when no one thought I could hear. And now I realized listening was going to save me and destroy them. People often assume that an old woman's life begins at the moment she starts slowing down. But mine began long before anyone in this house was born. I grew up poor, not the romantic movie kind of poor, but the kind where your stomach tightens before bed and your shoes are held together with hope. At 17, with no family left and no money to my name, I took a job as a live-in helper for a Mexican immigrant family in southern Idaho. They were kind in a way that felt foreign to me then. They fed me before feeding themselves, insisted I sit at the table as family, and corrected my posture when I apologized too much. They spoke only Spanish in the home, and slowly, naturally, without any classroom or textbook, the language wrapped itself around me. Within months, I understood everything. Within a year, I spoke well enough that the grandmother of the house would pat my cheek and call me her other granddaughter. Those 12 months were the only time before meeting Logan that I felt truly loved. No one since then has known that I learned Spanish not from study, but from survival and affection. I never flaunted it, I never mentioned it. It was the one piece of my past that felt like mine. Then came Logan. He was gentle, steady, one of the rare men who carried kindness in his bones instead of performance. I fell hard and fast, but loving Logan meant stepping into a world where I did not belong. His family saw me once, just once, and their judgment took root like mold. It was in the way his sister looked at my shoes, in the way his mother asked which relative I lived with before orphanages became the trend, in the way someone whispered he could have married up. Logan defended me, but one man's voice cannot silence a chorus determined to hate. Years later, after we adopted Marissa, those same people found a new vessel for their venom. Marissa had been a small, bright-eyed child with hair like ink and a laugh that filled the whole house. Logan adored her, and I loved her as fiercely as if she had come from my own body. But children absorb the world around them, and Logan's relatives had a way of dripping poison with the sweetest smiles. If Logan hadn't married Natalie, they told her, your father would have climbed higher. He would have given you a better life. Natalie holds him back. She has nothing to offer you. She's a burden. You need a real mother. Those words stuck to her like thorns. Even though I held her through fevers, taught her to braid her hair, and spent every extra dime making sure she had what I never did, she grew up believing I had ruined the life she deserved. Every birthday gift I gave her became cheap. Every meal I cooked was not like other families. Every mistake she made somehow became tied back to the idea that I was the anchor keeping her ship from ever setting sail. The saddest part is that she never resented Logan, only me. Logan was the saint, the man too noble to complain about the woman who dragged him down. And I carried that blame quietly because I loved him and because I loved her, despite how little she loved me back. There is something else, something that ties the past to the present, though I only understand it now. When Marissa was very young, no older than 5, she once overheard me speaking Spanish. I remember it clearly. A neighbor from my old workplace had stopped by, and she and I slipped naturally into the language of my youth. Marissa wandered into the room, listened for a few seconds, then ran off to play. She was too young to make sense of it, and moments like that disappear from the mind like chalk in the rain. She never connected those brief echoes to the woman she grew to despise. It never occurred to her that the language she uses to insult me is one I carry fluently in my bones. And then there is Chris, my current husband. He was Logan's closest friend, the only person who came around after Logan's stroke without needing thanks or praise. When Logan died, Chris became a bridge between the world I knew and the world I feared facing alone. I married him years later, not out of desperation but out of gratitude, companionship, and a gentleness that reminded me of the man I lost. But now I understand something unsettling. Marissa has always leveraged her connection to both men, to Logan's love and Chris's loyalty, to manipulate her place in this house. She treats them like tools, like shields. And Chris, blinded by guilt over surviving when Logan did not, let her twist that guilt into authority. Before Logan died, he sensed something was wrong. He told me once, barely audible through the exhaustion of his illness, "There is something she isn't telling us." I thought it was his worry speaking. Now I realize it was something deeper: intuition, the kind only a father can feel. I replay that memory often, especially now, after hearing what Marissa and Chris said about Logan that morning. Logan died without knowing the truth about her, and they never wanted me to know, either. But I have spent my whole life listening to what people thought I could not hear, and this time, listening will lead me straight to the truth they tried to bury. People imagine betrayal sounds like shouting or slamming doors, but mine came softly through walls, through vents, through the language they thought would hide them from me. Chris and Marissa had formed a habit since nearly the beginning of our marriage. Whenever they wanted to speak freely about me, they switched into Spanish. They would be in the kitchen, the hallway, or Chris's office, and the moment they wanted to say something sharp enough to cut, they folded themselves into that language like it was a shield. What they did not know was that every word slid straight into my understanding, line by line, sentence by sentence. It started subtly. I would hear my name and feel the tension in their tone even before the rest of the meaning reached me. Then the translation would form in my mind whether I wanted it to or not. If I had been a different woman, if I had not learned the language through people who loved me, I might have believed I was cursed by understanding. But knowledge is never the curse. People are. It became clear they had conversations about me almost every day. Conversations meant to exclude me, silence me, shrink me. Sometimes Chris would start with impatience, as though my very existence slowed down his life. "She's slow," he told Marissa once, in that language. "She forgets simple things. It's getting worse." I was standing only a few feet away, carefully drying dishes. I did not forget anything. I remembered everything, including the sound of his voice when he used to thank me for bringing stability to his life after Logan died. That tenderness had vanished somewhere along the way, replaced by irritation sharpened into cruelty. Marissa, of course, fed that cruelty. She always has. She would nod, speaking with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned. "She won't understand the paperwork," she told him another evening. "We can make decisions for her. She won't know what she's signing." My fingers curled so tightly around the edge of the countertop that the muscles in my hand ached. They weren't discussing my health, they were discussing strategy. And then the plan revealed itself slowly, sickeningly, like ice forming on glass. One afternoon, I heard them speaking softly in the living room. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening through the railing. Chris said, "If she moves into a home, this place becomes ours to manage. We can fix it up, sell it eventually. It's a smart move." My heart dropped. I had lived in that house longer than anyone except Logan, who had died in my arms. I had cared for it long before Chris stepped inside as a guest, long before Marissa treated it like her inheritance. Marissa replied with a confidence that made my stomach twist. "We can take the house," she said. "She doesn't need this space. She barely uses half the rooms. She's too old to fight us." I felt cold, even though the air in the house was warm. I wondered then how long they had been rehearsing that idea, how long they had been nudging it into reality, like a stone they kept rolling closer to the edge of a cliff. Every time they spoke in Spanish, I forced my face into neutrality. I let my breathing remain steady. I made myself look as harmless and unaware as they believed me to be. But nothing, not their cruelty, not their plotting, prepared me for the moment the knife went in deeper than ever. It happened one morning when Chris thought I had gone out to water the garden. I had forgotten my gloves and stepped back into the hallway, just as Marissa arrived. I remained out of sight, but their voices carried easily to where I stood. Chris asked her something light-hearted, something about whether she had slept well, but she ignored the question entirely and dove straight into venom. I heard her say, In Spanish, the sentence that made the world tilt. She stressed Logan to death. The words hit me before my mind translated them. A sound more than a sentence. But when the meaning formed clear, precise, undeniable, everything in me locked still. She blamed me for Logan's death, my Logan, my first love. The man who had held my hand through every hardship, the man who had collapsed one evening from a stroke that no doctor could have prevented. Grief flooded my chest so quickly it felt like drowning. I grabbed the wall to steady myself. Chris's answer made it worse. He said, also in Spanish, "You're not wrong. Logan carried her for years. If he had hit me, it would not have hurt more. Logan had never carried me. We had carried each other. We had survived the disdain of his family, the bruising weight of life, the quiet terror of illness. I was the one who cared for him when his memory began to fog. I was the one who held him when he whispered that he didn't want to forget my face. I was the one who washed him, fed him, stayed awake for nights on end, listening to the uneven rhythm of his breath. And when he died, when his heart gave out, I had felt mine crack with it. To hear Marissa rewrite that history, to hear Chris agree, was a cruelty I had not known a human heart could survive. I stood behind the wall, breathing slowly, carefully, because one wrong sound would give me away. My vision blurred, but my mind sharpened. Something inside me began stitching itself into resolve. They thought their words dissolved into safety because they spoke in the wrong language. They thought I was old, dim, slow. They thought they were building a plan in secret. I understand everything they say, and soon they will understand everything they have done. People talk about heartbreak like it is one single crack, one moment, that splits a life into before and after. But that morning, when I heard the truth they thought I could never understand, it did not crack me. It tore me open from the inside out. It was early, the sun barely touching the ridge, shadows stretching across the kitchen floor. I walked down the hallway, cane tapping softly, believing Chris and Marissa had gone out and the house was finally quiet. But their voices drifted from the dining room, the low, clipped rhythm they reserved for secrets spoken in Spanish. I froze just before the doorway. Marissa's voice trembled, not angry but confessing something she'd carried too long. She spoke quickly, and the meaning formed inside me instantly. I'm not adopted. Logan was my real father. She had known the truth for years, learned it from her aunt as a teenager, yet this was the first time I had ever heard her say it aloud. For a moment I thought I had misheard, but my Spanish was too natural, too deeply rooted to allow mistakes. The meaning struck cleanly. She was not adopted. Logan was her real father. My breath stopped. I clutched the doorframe as disbelief scraped through me like broken glass. I had loved Marissa since the day Logan brought her home, a trembling 5-year-old needing comfort. I raised her, soothed her nightmares, braided her hair, stood beside her at every school meeting. And all this time, she had been his child, his blood, a truth he never told me. My stomach twisted as her voice lowered, revealing even more. She said she had known since her teenage years. She said her aunt had told her the truth. She said she resented me for taking Logan away from her real mother, a woman he had never married, a woman he had once been involved with long before me. And then she said something that twisted deeper than all the rest. He loved me more because I was his, not her. Chris exhaled sharply. Paper rustled. He was probably holding one of the folders he kept in his desk. Then he spoke, soft and bitter, and he died, never knowing. The meaning sank in again with the brutal clarity of a blade. And he died, never knowing. Knowing what? That she was his? That she hated me? That she blamed me? That she had secrets wrapped under her skin like coiled wire? I gripped the wall harder. My knuckles whitened, my heart thudded painfully against my ribs. If grief had a flavor, it would have been metallic and sharp, because that was exactly how it felt in my mouth. Logan died, never knowing she would later try to take my home, my stability, my last connection to him. And worst of all, he died without telling me the truth about her. A part of me wanted to collapse. Another part wanted to scream. But I stood there, still as stone, letting the pain settle into its shape. I had learned long ago that breaking down in the moment of impact only left you too weak to clean up afterwards. Grief would be a luxury later. For now, I needed clarity. They kept talking. "We need to move faster," Marissa said, "before she starts asking questions. If she gets suspicious, everything falls apart. Before she realizes she's not as in control as she thinks, before she realizes, if only she knew." Chris's voice dipped lower, almost conspiratorial. "The evaluation next week. If the doctor signs off that she's losing memory, we can move her into a home within a month." My stomach twisted. They wanted to fake cognitive decline. They wanted a medical signature labeling me incompetent. They wanted legal authority over my home, my finances, everything I had left of Logan. I breathed slowly through the burn in my lungs. They believed I was defenseless. They believed the language hid them. They believed the lie Marissa carried gave them leverage. But they were wrong. My grief solidified into something sharper. Not revenge, not anger, awareness, resolve. I stepped back silently, retracing my footsteps up the hall. My body shook, not from age, but from emotion bottled so tightly I feared it might burst. I reached my bedroom and shut the door quietly. Then, with trembling fingers, I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out the small voice recorder I kept for reminders, shopping lists, doctor instructions, notes for myself. I stared at it for a long second. Then I clicked it on. They had forgotten I understood them. They had forgotten I am not helpless. They had forgotten who raised Marissa, who kept Logan's home alive, who survived a lifetime of quiet cruelty without crumbling. I pressed the recorder to my chest. "I won't let them take my home," I whispered. "I won't let them rewrite who Logan was. And I won't let them hide what they've done." Then I began walking toward the hallway again. Because if they were going to speak in secrets, I would gather every one of them. If they were going to trap me, I would build a record brick by brick until the truth became undeniable. And if they thought I was weak, they were about to meet a strength they never imagined. I turned the recorder back on, and I listened. I did not sleep after hearing Chris and Marissa whisper about truths Logan never knew and truths I never would. Those sentences stuck to the walls of my mind like frost, cold and impossible to scrape off. When the first light slipped through the curtains, I felt older than my 76 years, but also strangely steadier, as though something inside me had finally stopped begging for kindness and started demanding truth. I walked through the quiet house, past the photographs Chris refused to hang because he said they made the place look dated, past the table where Logan used to leave me handwritten notes, and into the narrow hallway outside the master bedroom. I remembered how Logan, especially in his last months, would stand there tapping the wall lightly with his knuckles, pretending to stretch his shoulder. At the time, I thought he was fighting the stiffness that came with his stroke, but now, with suspicion biting the edges of my thoughts, I placed my palm flat against the painted surface and slid it slowly upward. My fingers brushed a faint seam. A tiny click echoed under my hand. A panel shifted inward, opening like a secret exhale. Inside the hidden cavity lay a folded packet of documents and a small wooden box. Dust coated everything, soft as ash. I pulled the papers out and sat on the floor because my knees suddenly felt too weak to hold me up. The first sheet I unfolded was a deed, my name printed alone at the top, in bold type, no co-owner, no joint signature. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I was misreading it, but the line remained unchanged. Logan had transferred the house to me years ago. Why would he hide that? Why had Chris repeatedly insisted the house belonged to him, as Logan intended? And why had Marissa talked so confidently about selling it when the time was right? Questions gathered like storm clouds as I opened the next document. It was a will, not the will Chris kept locked in his office drawer, the one he used to quote whenever he wanted to remind me Logan trusted him with all responsibilities. This one was different. Older, yes, but valid, notarized, countersigned. Logan left everything to me, not to Marissa, not to Chris. Every asset, every savings account, every last piece of property mine. And tucked inside, written in Logan's shaky but unmistakable handwriting, was a note meant only for me. If you find this, it means I waited too long to speak about my suspicions. Trust no one until you see the full picture, even the ones standing closest. I read that line again and again until my eyes blurred. Suspicions? About what? About whom? The words felt unfinished, like he had run out of breath or time or courage. My fingers moved to the wooden box. It felt heavier than it looked, the way grief feels heavier than a body. Inside were 3 unlabeled USB drives, placed with purposeful care. I stared at them for a long moment. My heart told me not to open them while Chris and Marissa were awake. My instincts told me Logan had recorded something he was afraid to say aloud. And my chest tightened with a dread that came from knowing whatever was on those drives might change everything I thought I knew. I hid the papers beneath my sweater and closed the secret panel, sealing Logan's hiding place until I was ready. When I walked downstairs, I heard the grumbling noise of the coffee machine and Marissa's voice slicing through the air with irritation about the laundry I had folded. Wrong. Chris didn't look up when I walked in, and Marissa barely acknowledged me. They had no idea that the truth they'd been dodging had just stepped out of a wall and into my hands. I waited until they finished breakfast, then asked them both to join me in the living room. Chris sighed loudly, the kind of sigh meant to make me feel small. Marissa dragged her feet, as if simply being asked to sit with me was an inconvenience. They took their places on the couch, crossed their arms in perfect unison, and stared at me like they were waiting for me to waste their time. I placed the packet on the table between us. Neither of them reached for it yet. "This is about Logan," I said, keeping my voice even. Chris scoffed softly. "What now, Natalie?" I ignored him and opened the deed first, sliding it toward them. Marissa leaned in, her face tightening as she read. Chris grabbed it, scanned it, then tossed it back like it offended him. "Forgery," he said coolly. "Logan would have told me." I lifted the will, spread it open, and placed it beside the deed. Marissa's face drained of color as she skimmed the lines. Her breath hitched. This can't be right," she whispered. "There's nothing for me." Chris's voice sharpened. "Where did you get this?" "Logan left it for me to find," I said simply. His jaw twitched. Something flickered in his eyes, fear, recognition, maybe guilt, but he swallowed it quickly. "Natalie, you are confused. Logan asked me to manage everything. He trusted me." That word "trusted" burned through the air like acid. I felt anger rise, not loud, not explosive, but deep and steady, the kind that comes from too many years of swallowing hurt. My voice didn't shake when I said it. "You lied to your father until the day he died." The silence that followed was no accident. It fell heavy and real, pressing into all 3 of us. Marissa's eyes widened, her lips trembling as though she'd been slapped. Chris's face turned rigid, pale around the edges. "What?" Marissa whispered. "What did you say?" I did not break eye contact. "You heard me." She looked at Chris, panic swelling in her expression, and I could almost see her mind racing through every conversation she thought I never understood, every insult, every manipulation, every secret. Chris tried to steady her, placing a hand on her arm, but she pulled away from him, suddenly unsure whether he was still her ally or another liar in the room. I gathered the documents back into my hands. I had no intention of explaining what I had overheard, or how long I had understood their Spanish secrets, or what Logan had suspected before he died. I didn't need to. Their fear told me they already understood there was more. "There is more," I said aloud, confirming their worst suspicion. "And when I am ready, you will hear all of it." I walked out, leaving them stunned on the couch. Behind me, I heard Marissa's voice tremble. "She knows." And Chris, quieter than I had ever heard him, answered, "She can't know everything." But I did, or soon would, and the truth they had buried would not stay buried much longer. I waited until the house settled into its late afternoon quiet, the kind of quiet that feels borrowed rather than earned, because Chris had driven Marissa into town to clear her head. I knew what that meant, convincing her to blame me instead of asking questions he did not want her to ask. The moment their car pulled away, I locked the front door, sat at Logan's old desk, plugged in the first USB drive, and braced myself. The screen flickered, and then Logan's face appeared. Older, thinner, but unmistakably him. He sat at the dining table we had shared for decades, looking straight into the camera, as if looking straight through time to reach me. His voice carried the weight of a man who had run out of chances to say what mattered. "Natalie," he said softly, "if you are watching this, Then I did not find the courage to tell you these things when I should have, and I am sorry for that. I have watched how Chris speaks to Marissa, how he slips comments into her ear when he thinks I am not listening. I do not know exactly what he is telling her, but I fear it is not the whole truth. I fear he is planting something dangerous between you and her. Something that could grow. He paused, rubbing his forehead, the weariness in his posture unmistakable. I know Marissa loves you in her way, but she has been influenced by people who wish you no kindness. I do not know who is keeping secrets about her past, but I am certain someone is. I feel it in my bones, the same way I feel the weather before it turns. Do not trust the explanations Chris gives you about anything involving her. If something happens to me, you must protect yourself. My breath caught. Even in his final months, Logan carried worries he never shared, shouldering them alone so I would not drown under them. I opened the second USB drive. This one showed a different angle of the house, another quiet recording he had made without telling me. Logan sat in his armchair, staring into space as though trying to solve a puzzle only he could see. "Natalie," he murmured, "I think Chris is hiding something bigger than jealousy or resentment. He watches Marissa too closely, and she leans on him as though he is the one anchoring her instead of you. I have tried to ask him, but he always deflects, always laughs, always says I overthink things. But I know what a guilty man looks like, and Chris looks like guilt walking in my shoes. I worry for you." I covered my mouth, feeling my heart throb unevenly. To think Logan had recorded these thoughts alone in the dark, trying to prepare me for a future he feared he would not survive. It hollowed something inside me and filled it at the same time. The third drive held shorter clips, mostly audio with grainy visuals, Logan whispering concerns I did not even know he carried. By the end of it, tears blurred the room around me, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. Logan had left me answers. Now it was my turn to reveal the ones I had collected. When Chris and Marissa finally returned, they walked into the living room to find me standing at the center, the small recorder I had hidden on the counter placed on the coffee table beside Logan's laptop. Chris frowned, already annoyed. Marissa looked exhausted and irritated. I pressed play before either of them could speak. Their voices filled the room instantly, the insults, the contempt, every cruel sentence they had whispered in Spanish, echoing clearly now because I repeated each line aloud in English, translating their venom in real time. "She is a burden. She slows us down. Once we get her into a home, things will finally be easy." Their faces stiffened, disbelief and panic crawling across their expressions as I continued. Marissa whispered a curse under her breath. Chris closed his eyes, jaw tightening, but I did not stop. I played every line, every degradation, every calculated plan they thought I would never understand. And then the last one, the one that had cut deepest, poured through the speaker. Marissa's voice, casual and cruel. She stressed Logan to death. I translated it calmly, my voice steady, as both of them stared at me with the horror of people realizing the ground beneath them was gone. When the recording ended, silence swallowed the room, thick, suffocating, absolute, and I finally said the words they deserved to hear. Logan heard the truth too late. "I will not." Their shock was only the beginning. I knew the moment had come when I reached into Logan's old metal lockbox and pulled out the envelope he had marked with a shaking hand in thick black ink, to be opened only if the truth becomes necessary. My fingers trembled, not from fear but from the weight of everything that had already unraveled. Chris and Marissa stood in front of me, Chris with his arms crossed and his jaw stiff, Marissa pale and wide-eyed, as though still dizzy from hearing her own cruelty replayed in my translations. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a folded sheet, heavier than normal paper, the kind of document that carried a history no one wanted to confront. Logan had signed his name at the bottom in the careful script he used only when something mattered. He had done this in secret, while illness had already begun dimming his strength. I unfolded the page fully and forced my voice not to shake. "This," I said, "is a DNA report. Logan ordered it years ago, and now I understand why he did." Chris shifted his weight, suddenly restless. Marissa's throat bobbed as she swallowed. I continued. "The report confirms something Logan suspected but never told either of us. Marissa, you are not adopted. Her hand flew to her mouth. I saw shock flicker first, then confusion, then something deeper, a kind of terror that comes from feeling the foundation of your identity twist beneath you. The test proves that Logan was your biological father, I said. Your real father, from the beginning. Marissa staggered back as though someone had pushed her, her breath breaking into short gasps. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked open. He loved me, she whispered, and I hated her. The words dissolved into a sob that shook her shoulders. She pressed both hands against her face, as if trying to stop everything from spilling out at once. Regret, grief, disbelief. I felt the ache of it in my chest, but I did not move toward her. Not yet. She had spent years letting others paint me as the villain of a story I had lived faithfully. Now she stood in the ruins of that lie, finally understanding who had loved her without condition. While Marissa unraveled, Chris went unnaturally still, his eyes locked not on me, but on the DNA sheet in my hand. It was the stillness of a man calculating the damage, not mourning the truth. Logan had anticipated this too. At the bottom of the report, in handwritten ink darker than the printed text, were lines addressed directly to me. If something happens to me before I can confront Chris, know that I believe he knows more about Marissa's mother than he ever admitted. I suspect he may have been involved with her. I do not know the full story, but I fear he has never told the truth about his connection to her. I read those lines aloud. Chris's eyes flashed with something hot and ugly before he forced his expression blank. Marissa looked up sharply, tears streaking her cheeks. "What does that mean?" she demanded. Chris didn't answer. He simply stared at the floor, as though the wood grain could save him. His silence was the answer. I watched the realization strike Marissa, the betrayal, the manipulation, the subtle way Chris had shaped her resentment toward me for years. If Logan had been her real father, then Chris had been the outsider all along. Yet he was the one who had whispered poison into her ear. She squared her shoulders and stepped toward him. "Did you know?" she asked, voice trembling but stronger now. "Did you know Logan was my father?" Chris said nothing. His jaw shifted, his eyes narrowing, but he didn't speak. That silence swallowed the room whole. "You did," she said, voice breaking. "You knew, and you let me hate her. You let me think Logan wished he had a different wife. You let me believe lies because it served you." Chris finally lifted his chin, his voice low and defensive. "It was not my responsibility to fix your family's history." Marissa stepped back as if burned. For the first time since she was a teenager, she stood on my side without realizing it. She whispered, "You ruined everything." And I saw it, the truth uncoiling fully inside her, reshaping every memory she had clung to. Logan had been her father. Logan had loved her. Logan had died believing she hated me, but never knowing why. And the man she trusted now was the one who had stolen that truth from both of them. When she finally turned back to me, tears trembling on her lashes, she said the words I had waited a lifetime to hear, not an apology, but something deeper, something raw. "I was wrong," she whispered. "I did not know. I never knew." And for the first time, the bitterness between us cracked just enough for the truth to breathe. The reckoning had finally begun. I stood there for a long moment, looking at both of them, Chris rigid with embarrassment and anger, Marissa trembling beneath the weight of her own revelations, and for the first time since this nightmare began, the power in the room shifted entirely into my hands. I felt it settle into my bones, not as vengeance, but as a righteous reclamation of everything they had tried to strip away from me. Chris opened his mouth as if he might try to salvage whatever control he thought he still had. But I raised my hand, and he fell silent. I spoke with a calmness that shocked even me. "Chris," I said, "you need to leave this house, now, and you will not return." He blinked rapidly, stunned that I wasn't pleading or arguing. "Natalie, do not be ridiculous," he snapped, trying to regain his footing. "We can talk about this. You are emotional and—" "I am clear," I said, slicing through his excuse. "Crystal clear. You manipulated me. You lied to Logan. You allowed Marissa to grow up hating me because it benefited you. And you did it all while pretending to be the man who stepped in to help a grieving widow." I stepped closer and lowered my voice. "You're no friend to Logan, and you were never a husband to me." His face reddened, his jaw ticking as he searched for a defense he could not find. I didn't give him time to invent one. "You are finished here. You have no rights to this home, no claim to Logan's property, and no place in my life. Pack whatever you arrived with and go." The silence was suffocating. Then I delivered the final blow. "If you refuse," I said, "I will bring every recording, every translation, and every document to the sheriff." Idaho does not take kindly to elder manipulation, and trust me, the entire county would love to weigh in. Something behind his eyes cracked. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He also knew Idaho was a small place. Once you're marked, you are marked for life. Without another word, he left the room. I watched him walk out the door, carrying nothing but the jacket he came with. He didn't even look back, and by that evening, I learned through neighbors that word had already spread. Chris was finished. The community he once relied on wanted nothing to do with him. He had built his reputation on the illusion of loyalty, and now everyone saw what lay beneath. He was avoided in grocery aisles, whispered about at the diner, frozen out of every circle he used to cling to. For a man who lived on approval and perception, that exile was worse than any punishment I could have crafted. Marissa stayed behind, still sitting stiffly on the edge of the couch, her hands twisted together like a child afraid of her own shadow. When I finally met her eyes, she stood slowly, uncertainty trembling in her voice. "Natalie," she said, "I do not expect forgiveness. I barely expect you to look at me. But please, please let me stay here for a while. I have nowhere else to go." There was a time when those words would have shattered me, when I would have reached out and held her, desperate to keep the family I had worked so hard to protect. But that time was gone. "No," I said gently, but firmly. "You cannot stay." She flinched as though struck. "But respect begins at the door, Marissa," I interrupted, "and you never brought any with you." She swallowed, tears rising again. "I was wrong. I was so wrong." "Yes," I said softly, "but being wrong does not entitle you to live here." I pointed to the threshold. "If you wish to rebuild anything with me, it starts on the other side of that door, with effort, with humility, with truth, but not under my roof." She nodded eventually, wiping her face with trembling fingers. She walked out into the crisp Idaho air, and though she looked small and lost as she stepped into the driveway, I felt something unexpected inside me, not cruelty, not satisfaction, but peace. She finally understood consequences, and that was worth more than any apology. Once the door closed, the house fell quiet in a way that felt new, not empty, but cleansed. For the first time in years, I walked through each room without feeling watched, judged, or handled like a burden. Logan's photographs remained exactly where he left them. His handwriting still lived in the margins of old recipe cards, and the home he entrusted to me, truly entrusted, was finally mine again, in every sense that mattered. I spent the next days sorting through the damage their deceit had caused, restoring little things that had been moved or hidden, reclaiming the rhythm of a life I once feared I might lose. And with every passing hour, the weight of their voices faded further from my mind. I was free. Later that week, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the Idaho sun dip behind the trees. A quiet strength settled deep inside me. I had survived poverty, judgment, the loss of Logan, and now the betrayal of people who assumed I was too old, too slow, too ignorant to defend myself. But they were wrong. I was still here, still standing, still understanding. They spoke in a language they thought I could never understand. But the truth? I understood everything, and that's how I finally won. And that, my dear listeners, is the truth of what happened in that quiet Idaho house. People often assume age makes us fragile, unaware, or easy to deceive. They forget that women like us, grandmothers who have lived through hardship, loss, betrayal, and rebirth, carry entire lifetimes of wisdom behind our silence. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need revenge. I needed only the truth, and the truth did what justice always does. It found its way home. If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel that spark in your chest when justice finally arrived, or if it reminded you that strength doesn't disappear with age, then I hope you'll stay with us. There are countless stories like mine, stories of resilience, of love that outlives cruelty, of grandmothers who refuse to break even when the world tries its hardest. And if you want those stories to keep coming, I warmly invite you to subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Your support doesn't just help a channel, it preserves every voice that was once overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. Thank you for listening, for standing beside me, and for giving stories like mine a place to breathe. This is Natalie. And remember, my dears, grandmothers hear more, understand more, and endure more than anyone ever expects. Subscribe, stay close, and I'll see you in the next story.